So as we start looking at the topic of revelation in fundamental theology, we're going to begin by making a distinction. The distinction between general revelation and special revelation. Or we could call this the distinction between natural revelation, that would be general revelation, and supernatural revelation, or special revelation. The idea here is that creation itself functions as a kind of revelation. If you just think of revelation as God's self-manifestation, God communicating himself to us, then we can make this distinction. There is supernatural revelation or special revelation in the history of the people of Israel, in the person of Christ, those events where God entered into human history in a specific and supernatural way. But prior to that, there is this general revelation or natural revelation found in creation. The idea that creation is itself a type of manifestation of God through which there can be a real, authentic knowledge of God outside of or prior to that special or supernatural revelation. As where that special or supernatural revelation is often addressed to a specific group at a particular time, for instance, the people of Israel. Creation is a book, in a sense, that's opened to everyone. So there's a knowledge of God through creation and human reason. That's a certain revelation or manifestation of God, but in a natural way. So we want to look at this, and we can see this idea of general revelation. We can see that in the scriptures. So for instance, this is from the book of Wisdom, chapter 13, and I refer you to that whole chapter, Wisdom 13, for the fuller picture of this. But Wisdom 13 starts by saying, "For all men who were ignorant of God were foolish by nature, because they were unable from the good things that are seen to know him who exists, nor did they recognize the craftsman, God, while paying heed to his works, creation." So it's saying anyone who's ignorant of God is foolish because they're not seeing God in his creation. It goes on, "But they suppose that either fire or wind or swift air or the circle of the stars or turbulent water or the luminaries of heaven, that these were the gods that ruled the world." Goes on to say, "If through delight in the beauty of these things men assumed them to be gods, let them know how much better than these is their Lord. For the author of beauty created them. And if men were amazed at the power and working, let them perceive from them how much more powerful is he who formed them. For from the greatness and beauty of created things comes a corresponding perception of their creator." So the idea is through perceiving the goodness, the beauty of creation, that is a certain manifestation or revelation of God where we can come to some knowledge of God. We see this in a more poetic form in the Psalms, where the psalmist simply tells us in Psalm 19, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament, the skies," right, "proclaim his handiwork." That simply gazing at the night sky proclaims the glory of God and his work in creation. St. Paul takes up this same thing in the New Testament in Romans, where he says in Romans 1, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them." There's a self-manifestation. There's this natural revelation. How? "Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, his power and godliness, has been clearly perceived," where? "In the things that have been made." And he says, "So they are without excuse." It's interesting, from Wisdom, the author of Wisdom was kind of decrying idolaters, those who saw in the creature the creator, right, who mixed up creature and creation. And the author of Wisdom says they have no excuse because they should know that these things only point to God. Here in Romans, Paul is saying much the same thing when he's actually talking about how all of humanity is under the reign of sin. Well, how can that be? If the Jew has revelation in the law, well, what about the Gentile? And Paul says, no, even the Gentile, the one who doesn't have that special revelation, has creation as a book open to them that points to God, and so they're without excuse. So you just get this idea from Scripture that besides God's particular interventions in history that we call supernatural revelation or special revelation, there's this general or natural revelation. So what can we say about this natural revelation? Well, the knowledge of God through the contemplation of the created world is a revelation in a certain sense. It's a gift of God, and it's a manifestation which calls for religious homage on the part of the human person. So let's pull that apart a little bit. This natural or general revelation in nature, it's a gift of God. Even in this knowledge, which is natural to us, everything is still a free gift of God. The initiative is always God's. God is the author of the natural world. God is the author of human nature. God is the author of the light of reason that allows us to interpret the world. So far from this natural revelation being simply our minds rising up to God, really this natural revelation is God descending to meet us through creation. So this natural knowledge, this natural revelation is still always God's initiative and his gift. And it is a certain manifestation of the unknown God. It really does. This natural revelation gives us some sort of self-disclosure of who God is. The universe is not just a thing, remember. It's not just an object. The universe is a creature. It's a creature of the Creator. There's a link there in the very nature of what the universe is. So it's not some arbitrary decree of on God's part when he invites the creature to discover his invisible perfections in the visible creation. It's actually bound up in the very whatness of nature. We'd say it's ontological reality. Its very being as creature is what joins the very nature of creation as creature is what binds it to God as creator, right? We can also know something of the will of God, understood through this natural revelation, through what we call natural law, that we can discern through creation and through reason certain things about God's will and how he intends human beings to act. So it is a real manifestation. And then lastly, this manifestation also implies the obligation of rendering some sort of homage to God, due to him primarily through glorification and thanksgiving. And you see this in Paul in Romans 1, that really those who fail to do this are inexcusable because the order, the goodness of creation, as well as the natural law written in our conscience, testifies to a God who deserves this recognition, this honor, this glorification, and this thanksgiving. Now, all of that being said, there's a vast difference between natural revelation and supernatural revelation. There's a vast difference between coming to know God through what how he's shown himself in nature and our conscience, and then how he's intervened in salvation history in the people of Israel and in the person of Christ. So a few differences. Natural revelation is called natural because it's inscribed in the order of things by the fact of creation, right? So it's in that sense natural. It's in just the way created things are. So that means it has creatures as its point of departure and the inner light of reason as its guide. So it starts from creatures to make its way to God through reason. Contrast that to supernatural revelation. So now again, we're talking about God's words and deeds in history, in particular the what we'd find in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In supernatural revelation, we have its principle now not in creation, but in the loving and free approach of God, one and triune, right? The Trinity, the author of the supernatural order. It's not simply reflecting on creation on our own, but now God has broken into creation to reveal himself. Again, a difference. Natural revelation arrives at who? Well, it arrives at God, but in a particular way, or a particular slice of God, you could say. A very thin slice of God. Natural revelation arrives at a God who is the author of the world and in his causal relationship to the world. So what natural revelation reveals is that God is creator and he's the creator of creation. there's a much broader understanding that supernatural revelation brings. Supernatural revelation has as its goal or arrives at faith, and it tends towards encounter, right? This isn't simply a God out there, right? Even a God who deserves my thanksgiving and glorification. This is a God who wants a relationship, one who enters into our world to cause relationship, to bring about relationship. So it tends towards encounter, towards the vision of the living God. It has as its object the very mysteries of the intimate life of God. So this isn't simply the uncaused cause of Aristotle or the unmoved mover, the one who got everything going. This is a God who wants me to enter into the very mysteries of his life as Trinity. Another difference. Natural revelation through creation, it discovers God's will in natural law, but not as the object of a personal address. God isn't addressing me as an individual through that. But it's implied in the established order. I reflect on nature and I come to how I should act. Right? In contemplating creation, we don't feel that we're addressed as an individual. We don't have to answer a call through this natural revelation. Creation speaks of God, we could say, but God himself does not speak, is perhaps one way to look at it. God doesn't enter into dialogue with us through this natural revelation. But in supernatural revelation, God intervenes in person. At a given point in time and space, he enters into a dialogue of friendship with the human person. This is infinitely more valuable, infinitely more awe-inspiring. In natural revelation discovers a present and personal God, but the mystery of the person escapes it. So this is much like if we were to come across the paintings of Vincent van Gogh, that reveals that there was a person who was present who painted it, but the mystery of who that person is escapes us. This presence of God in natural revelation always remains pale and undetermined on many points. So it's only a slice of God. It isn't. God isn't revealing his full person to us in this natural revelation. For the human person, for us, the knowledge from natural revelation remains obscure, it remains difficult, it remains full of puzzles. That's why left to natural revelation alone, humanity has devised all kinds of religions to respond to it, but it takes supernatural revelation to enter into the fullness of the truth of God. So in supernatural revelation is inaugurated a dialogue, a friendship, and a communion with God. God makes known to us the mystery of his inmost life as Trinity and his plan for salvation for us, inviting us into a personal communion of life. So you can see the depth, the specificity, the personal nature of revelation is all enhanced infinitely in this supernatural revelation. So God has revealed himself to the world through creation. Enough that St. Paul says that those who don't recognize God, his existence, and offer that thanksgiving and homage have no excuse. But the supernatural revelation that as God entered into history with the people of Israel and culminating in Christ is of infinite more depth, infinite more value. And in that supernatural revelation, we encounter a God who wants to have a relationship, a dialogue, and communion with us.